Chapter 16. On the Way Home. Not until the party was breaking up and he saw Sammy in the doorway did young Matt go back in the house. When they were riding again out of the circle of light and the laughter and shouts of the guests were no longer heard, Sammy tried in vain to arouse her silent escort, chatting gaily about the pleasures of the evening. But all the young man's reserve had returned. When she did force him to speak, his response were so short and cold that at last the girl, too, was silent. And then, man-like, he wished she would have continued talking. By the time they reached Compton Ridge, the moon was well up, and for the last 2 miles Sammy had been watching the wavering shafts of light that slipped through the tumultuous leaves and swaying branches. And as they rode, 1,000 fantastic shapes appeared and vanished along the way, and now and then, at the sound of their horses' feet echoing through the silent forest, some wild thing in the underbrush leapt away into the gloomy depth. Coming out on top of the narrow ridge, the brown pony crowded closer to the big white-faced sorrel, and the girl, stirred by a weird loveliness of the scene, broke the silence with an exclamation. "Oh, Matt! Isn't it fine? Look there." She pointed to the view ahead. "Makes me feel like I could keep just going and just never stop." The man, too, felt the witchery of the night. The horses were crowded more closer together now, and leaning forward, the girl looked up into his face. "What's the matter, Matt? Why won't you talk with me? You know it ain't true what them folks said back there." The sorrel was jerked further away. "It's true enough, so far as it touches me," returned the man shortly. "When are you going to the city?" "I don't know," she replied. "Let's don't talk about that tonight. I don't want to even think about it, not tonight. You don't believe what they're saying, Matt. You know you don't. You mustn't ever believe such a thing as that. I never could get along without you and Aunt Molly and Uncle Matt nohow." The brown pony was again crowding closer to his mate, and the girl laid a hand on her companion's arm. "Say you don't believe me for what they said, Matt. You know I wouldn't do no such thing even if I could. There mustn't be anything ever come between you and me. Never. I want us always to be like we are now. You've always been so good to me since I was even a little kid, and you whipped big Lem Wheeler for teasing me, and I don't guess I could ever get along without knowing you was around somewhere," she finished with a half sob. It was almost too much. The man swung around in his saddle, and the horses, apparently of their own accord, stopped. And without a word, the big fellow stretched forth his arms, and the girl, as if swept by a force beyond her control, felt herself swaying towards him. The spell was broken by a trampling of horses and the sound of loud voices, and for a moment they moved and held their place, motionless, as if rudely awakened from a dream. The sound was coming nearer, and then young Matt spoke. "It's Wash Gibbs and his crowd from the still. Ride into the brush, quick." There was no time for flight. In the bright moonlight they would have been easily recognized, and a wild chase would have followed. Leaving the road, they forced their horses into a thick clump of brush, where they dismounted to hold their animals by their head. Scarcely had they gained this position when the sight of the crowd reached the spot where they had been a moment before. Wash Gibbs was easily distinguished by his gigantic form, and with him 10 others, riding 2 and 2, several of whom were known to young Matt as the most lawless characters in the country. All were fired by drink and were laughing and talking, with now and then a burst of song or a vulgar jest. "I say, Wash," called one, "what'll you do if young Matt's there?" The unseen listeners could not hear the leader's reply, but those about the speaker laughed and shouted with some great glee. And then the 2 in the brush distinctly heard the last man in the line ask his companion, "You reckon he'll put up much of a fight?" And as they passed from sight, the other answered, "Wash don't aim to give him nothing to show for it." When the sounds had died away, young Matt turned to the girl. "Come on, we got to keep him in sight." But Sammy held back. "Oh, Matt, don't go yet. We mustn't. Didn't you hear what that man said? It's you they're after. Let's wait here until they've clean gone away." "No, it ain't me. It ain't me they're after," the young feller replied, and before the young woman could protest further, he lifted her to the saddle as easily as if she was a child, and then springing to the back of his own horse, he led the way at a pace that would keep them within hearing company of the men. "Who is it, Matt? Who is it if it ain't you?" asked the girl. "I don't know for sure yet, but I'll tell you pretty soon." They hadn't gone far when young Matt stopped the horses to listen intently, and soon, by the sound, he could tell the party ahead had turned off from the ridge road and were following the trail that led down the eastern side of the mountain. A moment later the mountaineer listened, as if to make sure, and then he spoke. "Them devils are going up to the ranch after Dad Howitt. Sammy, you got to ride hard tonight. They won't hear you now, and they're just getting off every minute. There ain't no other way, and I know you'll do it for the old man. You get home as quick as you can, and you tell Jim what's up. You tell him I'll hold him till he gets here." Even as he spoke, he sprang from his horse and began loosening the saddle girths. "But, Matt, how could you? You can't get by them. How are you going to get there by them in time?" "Down the mountain. I'm taking a shortcut," he answered as he jerked the heavy saddle from his horse and threw it under some nearby brush. "But they'll kill you. You can't never face that whole crowd alone." "Well, I can do it better'n Dad can, and him not looking for them." Slipping the bridle from the sorrel, he turned the animal loose, and then removed his coat and hat and laid them with the saddle, and then to the girl on the pony he said sharply, "Get going, Sammy. Get going now. Don't you see how you're losing time? Them devils will do for Dad Howitt like they done for old man Lewis. Your father's the only man who can stop 'em now. Get riding hard, and tell Jim to hurry. And goodbye, Sammy." As he spoke, he struck her horse, and struck him with such a blow that the animal sprang away. For a moment, Sammy attempted to pull up her startled pony, and then young Matt saw her lean forward in the saddle and urge the little horse to an even greater speed. And as they disappeared down the road, the giant turned and ran crashing through the brush down the steep side of the mountain. There's no path to follow, and with deep ravines to cross, rocky bluffs to descend or scale, and in some places wild tangles of vines and brush and fallen trees, the trip before him would have been a hard one even in the full light of day. At night it was almost impossible, and he must go like a buck with the dogs in full cry. When Sammy came in sight of her home, she began calling to her father, and as the almost exhausted horse dashed up to the big gate, the door of the cabin opened, and Jim came running out. Lifting his daughter from the trembling pony, he helped her into the house, where she sobbed out her message. At the first word, "Wash Gibbs," Jim reached for the cartridge belt. By the time Sammy had finished, he had taken his Winchester from the brackets over the fireplace. Slapping a bridle into his horse that was feeding in the yard, he sprang upon the animal's back without waiting for a saddle. "Stay in the cabin, girl, and you put out that light, and don't open that door till I come," Jim said, and then he was gone. As Sammy turned back into the house, and from away down in Mutton Hollow on the night winds came the sound of guns. End of chapter 16.